All right, class, settle in, settle in. Today, we're diving into one of the most incredible feats of biology, how we actually see color. It's something we totally take for granted every single day, but trust me, the science behind our vibrant world is absolutely mind-bending. So let's kick things off with what seems like a simple question. Take a look at this apple. What color is it? I'm guessing you're all thinking, it's red, obviously. And yeah, that's what your eyes are telling you. But what if I told you your eyes are only giving you part of the story? Because you guessed it, it's a trick question. That apple itself doesn't actually have any color. The redness you perceive isn't a physical property of the fruit at all. Nope, it's a perception, a super elaborate story constructed entirely inside your brain in a fraction of a second. So, in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how that story gets written. We'll start with the physics of light. Then we'll meet the tiny detectors in our eyes that do all the work. From there, we'll figure out how the brain decodes the signals, take a peek at how other animals see the world, and finally, we'll ask the big question, why your personal rainbow might be totally different from mine. Okay, let's jump right in. Section 1. What is color, really? Before we can even talk about the biology, we have to understand the raw ingredient our eyes are working with, and that's light. So, the official textbook definition says color vision is about telling the difference between light frequencies no matter how bright it is. But what does that really mean? Well, think of it like your ear telling the difference between a high C and a low C on a piano. Your eye is doing the exact same thing, just with light waves instead of sound waves. Now, the full electromagnetic spectrum is enormous. It's got everything from radio waves to X-rays. But our eyes, they're only tuned in to this teeny tiny little slice right here, what we call the visible spectrum. Every single color you have ever seen in your entire life is just your brain's interpretation of these specific wavelengths hitting your eye. That's it. So, how do we actually detect those wavelengths? Let's move on to section 2 and meet the hardware. We're talking about the photoreceptors in your retina. Inside your retina, you've basically got two teams of light-detecting cells, rods and cones. Rods are your night vision specialists. You have a ton of them, like 120 million, and they're amazing in low light. But they are completely colorblind. It's why you can't really see colors in a dark room. The real stars of our show today are the cones. You have way fewer of them, only about 6 million, and they need bright light to work. But they are the sole reason you can see a rainbow. And here is the magic number for human color vision, 3. That's it. Most of us are trichromats, which means our entire rich, colorful experience of the world is built on the signals from just 3 types of cone cells. We call them S, M, and L, for the short, medium, and long wavelengths of light they're most sensitive to. Now, we usually call these the blue, green, and red cones. But here's a little secret. That's not exactly accurate. The S cones, yeah, they peak in the violet-blue range, so blue is pretty close. But check out the L cones, our so-called red cones. Their peak sensitivity isn't even in the red part of the spectrum. It's actually in the greenish-yellow range. So that red you see on the apple, it's a much more complicated calculation by your brain than you think. Okay, so the cones have detected the light. Fantastic. But how does that raw data become a perception of something like, say, magenta? For that, we have to follow the signal on its journey from the eye to the brain. Which brings us to the big question, right? If we only have 3 types of detectors, how on earth do we see millions and millions of different colors? The answer isn't in the cones themselves, but in what the brain does with their signals after the fact. For a long time, there were these 2 competing theories about this. The trichromatic theory said it's all about the 3 cones. But the opponent process theory said, no, we process color in opposing pairs, red versus green, blue versus yellow. You know what's cool? They were both right. They just described 2 different stages of one single, beautiful system. Stage 1 is detection, at the cones. Stage 2 is encoding, which happens right after, in the nerve cells. So let's walk through it. First, light hits the retina and stimulates the S, M, and L cones to different amounts. Then, and this is the key part, special nerve cells immediately compare that information. They run a calculation. How much red versus how much green am I seeing? How much blue versus how much yellow? Your brain doesn't just get a red signal, it gets a more red than green signal. It's an incredibly clever and efficient way to code information. But here's the thing. This 3-cone opponent process system that we have, it's not the only game in town. not by a long shot. So for our next section, let's get a totally different point of view by trying to see like an animal. So it turns out our three-cone system is actually kind of rare for mammals. Your dog or your cat, they're dichromats. They only have two types of cones, so their world looks a lot like what a person with red-green colorblindness sees. But then you look at birds, reptiles, and fish. Many of them are tetrachromats. They have a fourth cone type, usually for seeing ultraviolet light. They can literally see colors that we can't even imagine. And this leads to some unbelievable abilities. Bees can see ultraviolet patterns on flowers that are basically landing strips, totally invisible to us. Birds can spot camouflage prey using UV colors. And then you have the undisputed champion of color vision, the mantis shrimp. With anywhere from 12 to 16 types of color receptors, their visual world is a level of complex that we just cannot comprehend. Which brings us to our final and maybe the most mind-bending section of all. Let's talk about your personal rainbows and just how subjective sight really is. Here is one last piece of proof that color is all in your head. It's a thing called color constancy. So if you take a white piece of paper and you look at it under a reddish light, the light that's actually hitting your eye is physically red. But the paper still looks white to you, right? Why? Because your brain knows the lighting has changed, and it automatically subtracts that reddish tint to show you what it thinks is the true color. Your brain is actively interpreting reality, not just passively recording it. Through this entire incredible process, from a wave of light, to the cones, to the opponent channels, all the way to your visual cortex, the average human can distinguish around 10 million different colors. It's just a staggering number, all built from just 3 initial inputs. But this all leads to a classic philosophical question. You and I can both look at that apple and agree to call it red. But is your internal, subjective experience of red the same as my internal experience of red? The honest answer is, there's absolutely no way to know. The experience of color is a private show happening inside each and every one of our minds. And that's where we're going to end our lesson today, with this idea that color isn't a property of the world, but a property of our experience of the world. It is a biological and neurological miracle that literally paints our reality. So the next time you look at a beautiful sunset, just take a second to appreciate the incredible journey that light is taking to create that spectacular show just for you. Class dismissed.